report, so we'll move on to 10.1, which is the Kingston Annual Report for 2023-2024. And councillors, I will move this through the chair. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Davies. Very briefly, it is my responsibility as the Mayor under the Local Government Act to present the annual report to a council meeting open to the public. I am very proud to present this report to tonight's meeting and would refer everyone to the report for review. Councillors, is there any debate required on this item? Councillor Oxley.
Thank you. Just briefly to outline why I will be abstaining from this report this evening. We've had a lot of discussion prior to this council meeting on the different types of decisions allowed during caretaker, and I raised an issue with the annual report with the General Manager last week, which subsequently had the images removed from the report. I don't think that goes far enough to comply with caretaker provisions, and whilst the decision itself would not be a prohibited decision during caretaker, there are pages within this report that I don't think comply with the Local Government Act in terms of potentially influencing votes during an election period. So subsequently, I will be abstaining from this decision this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Oxley. I'll refer that point through to our governance team just for further advice. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, there is no issues with the councillor taking the determination that she has, nor the information that's been relayed at a council meeting tonight. Thank you.
Is there any other debate required, councillors? Thank you. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Mayor JDB. I'll be voting in favour of this report, this Kingston's annual report 2023-2024. I do note that it's worth us noting it's an incredibly comprehensive report, and I think we're actually going to be putting it up for an award. But you know, so it really is like a picture of where we are currently. And I do note though that our capital works. That we are 17 million more than budgeted, and that kind of reflects the state of the economy, but it is also something for a future council just to keep their eye on. The other one is that our state-funded grants are well down year on year, and I think that's going to be something that we can see, because we know Kingston officers are incredibly skilled at getting us those grants. So I would suggest it's more of a statewide limit in terms of grant funding, but it's another thing for our council to be aware of, the future council to be aware of. And this is a great way for any resident to really get a picture, a snapshot in time of where our council is and where our priorities are. So I do recommend this for people to read and particularly once the council election is over and we can put the designed version out on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley. Councillors, any other debate required? Thank you. I'll put the item to the vote and ask all those in favour to please raise your hand. Councillor Cochrane. Councillor Davies. Councillor Hill. Councillor Hua. Councillor Beasley and Councillor Saab. All those voting against? And all those abstaining. Councillor Eden, Councillor Oxley. Thank you, councillors. I declare that carried. Item 10.2 is the Governance and Compliance Report. Councillors, do we have a motion? Thank you. Councillor Beasley, you move the officer recommendation. Thank you. And councillors, do we have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Davies. Councillor Beasley, do you wish to speak to this item?
I am happy to move this item. I do note that there's been a bit of public concern in relation to this item during caretaker period. I would therefore I'd ask the question to the relevant officer, what particularly is changing? I believe it's the fact that we're adding a few names of officers to be clarified as officers. But if I could ask the relevant officer just to to just elaborate on the particularly point A, 1.A of this particular motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Betts. I'll refer that question through to our General Manager, Planning and Place, Mr Jonathan Goodman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley, and through you, Mayor Davey-burns. Sorry, kind of need my computer to assist with the question. The delegation is already afforded to a number of officers, and it's got a very limited role, and it's a role under the Local Government Act under Section 313, on the basis that under the Planning and Environment Act we were to instigate proceedings, and that happens very, very rarely. Under the Planning and Environment Act, it relates to, sorry, just bear with me, Part 6, Division 4, which relates to evidence and notices, and it's a general part of executing the provision of those notices. And the power is already afforded to a number of the officers in that suite of delegations. This question came up late today. So all of our senior officers already have that power, and a number of our other officers as well. So I hope that clarifies your question.
Thank you, Mr Goodman. Thank you, Councillor Beasley.
So I'm happy to support this on the basis that it's extending their delegation to further officers, of which currently we have officers with this particular delegation where we are, and we're just extending it to 2 others to fulfil their duties as officers. Thank you. Thank
you, Councillor Beasley. Councillor Davies will reserve. Councillor, is any debate required on this item? Thank you. Councillor Oxley.
Thank you. Similar to one of the other items, we are currently obviously in an election period, and we had this discussion before this council meeting, and it was a long discussion before this council meeting, and I've raised it over a number of particular issues. We received legal advice on a notice of motion that I was going to submit to this meeting, and I can't say what that legal advice entailed because that would be confidential. That legal advice subsequently made that notice of motion out of order, as the Local Government Act, according to that legal advice and officers, would have prevented us from debating that motion because it was an election issue. Now we have, at the very least of what I can see, 2 candidates for this election speaking online about this matter before us that is now an election issue. More than 1 candidate, 2 candidates, speaking about transparency and governance at Kingston Council, particularly in relation to this issue. Now, I don't have an issue with Council, prior to any of this being online and an election issue, with Council making this decision. It is my view that we are now prohibited under the Local Government Act, as this is now an election issue and would have or be likely to influence the way that someone would vote in a council election, that we are prohibited from making a decision on point 1A and point 1B. It has been submitted as a public question, it has been submitted as emails, it is now public discourse online by at least 2 candidates, and we cannot make this decision. I would propose that we defer point 1A and point 1B to the next council.
Thank you, Councillor Oxley. Noting the severity of the concerns that you've raised, I will again refer through the points to our governance manager just for further advice, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. I anticipate that the sections of the Local Government Act that Councillor Oxley is referring to, both Section 69 and Section 304, prohibitions on council or members of council staff. I do note that in Section 304 there's reference both to a councillor or member of council staff must not use council resources. So it would be my view that council may indeed, or councillors and indeed officers may hold a view that it might be appropriate to move the motion as recommended within the paper, but an individual councillor may take a different position and therefore wish to either amend the motion itself or choose not to vote in support. or again to perhaps abstain from the motion. So following Councillor Oxley's argument, it is entirely proper and appropriate for the individual councillor to determine a point of view that applies to that individual councillor.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr Hogan, for your advice. Councillors, is there any other debate required?
I move to deferral.
Sorry, can I just ask a question to the relevant officer? Because I was actually a bit confused by that answer.
We'll come back to your point.
So the question is, 1A and 1B, are they in breach of the caretaker provisions if we vote on them tonight, is what I would like to know.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. We'll refer that question through to the Governance Manager, Mr Hogan, and then we'll return, given you both raised at the same, you stood up at the same time. Thank you, Mr. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Hogan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So it's the view, it would be the view of officers, certainly at the time of publication and even still now, that the information contained within the decision before Council is not intended to or likely to influence the outcome of an election. On that basis, it would be the view of governance that it would be appropriate for Council to vote as the recommendation stands if they wish. However, again, to Councillor Oxley's point, individual councillors may choose, or Council itself may choose to take a more conservative view and indeed make an alternative recommendation.
Sorry, thank you, Mr Hogan. I was just conferring with governance on Councillor Oxley's deferral motion. Councillor Oxley, you've moved a deferral, which I believe officers are writing that on there. Does that reflect the position you'd like to put forward as your procedural motion tonight? Thank you very much. Next steps are we need to call for a seconder. Do we have a seconder for your deferral motion? Thank you, Councillor Eden. We'll note that. Just one moment. All right. Councillor Oxley, would you like to speak to this motion?
Thank you, and I would suggest that Council err on the side of caution here, given I am reading comments online from, as I said, at least 2 candidates, and I would suggest that perhaps the outcome of this will then be posted on the forums and is very clearly an election issue in relation to governance, transparency, the way that this council operates. They are election issues that most candidates have been referring to, and I would suggest that now that this is public, it is public knowledge, there's quite significant discourse about it online. There are emails that have been sent to all councillors. There are public questions submitted this evening. Council needs to defer this, err on the side of caution, defer it to the next council. It is very clearly becoming an election issue, if it isn't already. I think council needs to defer this evening.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Oxley. Councillor Eden.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And just briefly, I would say, based on the advice that I believe has been circulated by officers that drew the line in the sand here for what can and can't be dealt with, and references being made to, in general, a drop in the bucket contaminates the bucket fully, whether it be one drop or it be the full can of paint, it's all contaminated once it becomes an election issue. Or advice to the effect that if people are campaigning on it or it's an issue being debated online in forums, I think using the test that has been used on another item that could have been before Council tonight, I think, again, this would be an issue with a drop in the bucket that is being debated online by multiple candidates. And I believe that it has now hit that threshold that had been articulated to by officers to councillors. In the past, I don't believe the advice that former CEOs and legal advice had been that such an issue would. But again, that line had been drawn, I'd say, at a very different point in the sand under prior acts that officers would have been getting that advice under and their interpretations of it. I do note in speaking to the deferral that the issues here can in fact cause some operational issues for the organisation. However, I don't believe that the Act speaks to specifically minor inconveniences, because we have been told that this wouldn't be a major inconvenience to the organisation if it is deferred. On that basis, I'm happy to support a deferral. A new council can determine whether or not they think it's appropriate to give more powers to officers. Rightly or wrongly, that's a debate of candidates that they are actively having. So it is on that basis, Madam Mayor, that I would support the deferral, being that I believe it is on the side of conservatism that officers had drawn the line in the sand over on other issues. And on that basis, I'll be supporting the deferral. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Eden. Do any councillors wish to debate this motion? Councillor Davies?
Yes, thank you. I note from the definition of officer on the instrument of appointment that we have 13 people listed there. I also note the comments of Mr Goodman that 11 of these people already have the delegation and that there would only be a minor inconvenience. I do think perhaps there may have been some misunderstanding as to what was actually being sought to be done tonight under this motion. So on that basis, I don't see any issue with deferring it, given we've already got 11 of the 13 already have these powers to start with. So I'm in favour of the deferral. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Any other debate required, councillors? Councillors, oh, sorry, Councillor, no, hold on. Actually closed. No closing, sorry. Thank you, just double checking. Oh, Councillor Hua, sorry. Thank you, team.
I just want to ask a question to the relevant officer, probably to Johnson. So if this deferral is carried over, what will be the impact? Does that mean we're going to have less officers approval planning application? What exactly is the implication?
Thank you, Councillor Hua, for your question. I'll refer that again through to Mr Goodman. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Davey-burns. Councillor, the implications would be really minimal. It's not a power that officers regularly exercise, but it is one nonetheless that needs to be provided by council. As has been discussed in the debate, there are a number of other officers that already hold that power, so they could stand in if need be. It wouldn't have a day-to-day material impact on the flow of our planning decisions.
All right, thank you, councillors. We'll move to voting if we've concluded the debate. Councillors, I'll ask that we put this in parts. So on part 1, which is defer the considerations of point 1A and 1B, the officer recommendation, can I ask all those in favour to please raise your hand? Thank you, and I'll declare that carried unanimously. On item 2, to receive the minutes from the September 2024 Audit and Risk Committee, I'll ask all those in favour to please raise your hand. And I'll declare that carried unanimously. And on item 3, note the informal meeting of Councillor Records, Appendix 3. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And I'll declare that carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Item 10.3 is the draft biannual report from the Audit and Risk Committee, September 2024. Councillors, do we have a motion? Thank you, Councillor Davies. And do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Davies, do you wish to speak to this item? Councillor Hill will also reserve. Any debate required, councillors? Thank you. I'll put this item to the vote.